Hello everyone. Oh, that's not supposed to happen. It's not supposed to take off without me. Um, yeah, so I'm sharing the results of a pilot study which I conducted because I'm in the process of applying to do a PhD, and this has turned into a long story because of COVID. So I just decided that rather than wait for the universities to get the act together and everything to resolve, I'd just get going and start working on some ideas I had and investigating the tools that I would like to use in the PhD. And so the idea was to be monitoring people's physiology while running a reg and while they're doing various activities, normal activities and meditations, and have a look at how all of those tools correlate together. So here were the aims: to develop an experimental model for the PhD project. And I was looking at the effects of normal activities compared to two whole body focused meditations. And the reason for that is a lot of meditations these days are the mind is kind of controlling the body. To me, it's a much more physical process than the original intention of meditation. So coming back to the idea that the whole body is the mind. Initially, the yoga was included, but for reasons that we'll go into, I'm leaving that out in subsequent experiments. And having a look at how that relates to two psychological scales, because evidently, you know, whatever people's worldview is and how they are psychologically could impact the physiology and the non-local aspects of consciousness. And to include an iPhone app for doing the physiological recording to see whether that could liberate me from, you know, being stuck in a lab with very expensive equipment. So because COVID came in, the sessions ended up being all conducted online. And it was interesting to have participants on the other side of the world on the screen, the reg next to me, and they're doing their physiological recordings where they are. So the whole experiment was kind of globally distributed, which was interesting. So as I said, especially the people in this group are coming to appreciate that mind is not brain, and that if mind is consciousness, but there's still a lot of brain focus. So what about the whole body as being the mind? And hence the embodied nature of the meditation and the yoga that were looked at. And you know, I've realized for a long time that the brain is made out of cells, and so the rest of the body is made out of cells. And so really what we've got is a communication through all the cells in the body. So it's a bit crazy to separate the brain and say, like, the brain is the great executor and the rest of the body is some kind of floppy puppet that's hanging off there. And so I feel that in a lot of research, we're missing the contribution of the whole body to consciousness. And one of the ways of looking at that interface between the body and the psychological aspects of a human is through heart rate variability, which is kind of the poster child at the moment of this sort of work. But just for those who are not familiar with HRV, HRV indexes neurocardiac function and is generated by heart-brain interactions and dynamic, non-linear autonomic nervous system processes. So basically saying that, the nervous system that's running our body is interacting through the heart with, you know, with our physiology. So we've got the brain-heart physiology connection going, and it's all revealed by the HRV. But then that doesn't take into account non-local correlations. So what's happening in the bigger field that's impacting HRV and things like that. So, is this working? Okay. My slideshow is acting up. My slideshow is definitely acting up. Okay, I think I'm going to have to stop the slideshow and take over manually because it's just deciding to do its own thing.
Well, as we know, sometimes when you get a little bit nervous, it can have an effect on electronics. So
Well, I
it,
tested this and it was fine, but
it
now
seems
it's
to be,
just
yeah, it seems to have its own mind, doesn't it? Well, yes, you can stop it and run it, and we can go from there.
yeah, it's very strange. Okay. So, methods started off with me going to people's houses because I'd gone through that whole process about, controls and how you set up a lab and all the subtle influences on people. So, the brilliant inspiration was to go to their home, so they're in a completely familiar setting, and then we would run the sessions there. But then COVID happened, and suddenly everything had to be bumped onto line. So, participants who went through the entire sequence. And it was notable that they were all very clear in terms of no drugs and so on. So there was quite a consistency in not having those influences in it. Everybody did the psychological questionnaires, which some of you are familiar with, the psychological wellbeing scale of Carol Riff and the beliefs about consciousness and reality of Emance Barash and Robert Moore. And everybody did 3 10-minute sessions each of the baseline activities, like just going about their housework or whatever they're doing, and then meditation and yoga. And after their activities, they would do their physiological recordings on the iPhone app. And then before, during, and after every session, I was running the field reg. So it's not trying to influence the reg, but just having the reg sitting there to see what was going on. Okay. It's not working. Okay, that's a start. Nope. I think it's because the,
It seems to be in play mode, Diane. I think doing it manually might actually be
yeah, I'm
um,
trying to get out of
easier.
play mode and it's not letting me get out of play mode. Let me go. Yeah. See, it's not on slideshow, which is really weird. I don't know why it's doing it automatically. This was all working beforehand, but now it's not.
That's quite all right. Take your time. This is this is a live show, folks.
It's a live show. If anybody's got a brilliant idea about how to stop this thing
try
going
try to
by
hit
itself,
escape and hit the escape key.
I've hit that. Ah,
Okay.
now it's letting me do it.
Okay. Good.
Okay, here we go again. Production methods. Okay, so apart from that little interruption, physiological results. It was really interesting to do the stats on such a small number of people and start to get significant and meaningful results, which was a bit of a surprise. Many of the frequency domain parameters of the heart rate variability, which are total power, high frequency, low frequency, and very low frequency waves in the heart, increased between the before and after for all conditions. So that was interesting because that indicates that the experimental situation itself was giving people a beneficial effect on their physiology. So heads up, everybody who works with human subjects, this is pretty major. Um, and so in the baseline activities, when people were just doing their normal daily things, there was from 132 to 180% increase in those physiological parameters. For yoga, it was not so much, but in meditation, it went from 187 to 221% increase in those parameters in all conditions. So that was kind of surprising to me. Commensurate with that, the stress went down in all conditions. So the people were actually feeling less stressed by doing an experiment than they were normally. With the meditation results, there was a significant increase in the very low frequencies of the heart, peak was 0.002, and there was a trend in increase of the lower frequencies. Yoga, not significant increase, although there was a bit of an increase. This is the psychological well-being scale, and that turned out to be systematically correlated with many of the variables of heart rate variability. And that was an interesting result because there's an understanding in the physiological field that heart rate variability is higher when there's general well-being in people. So that was a confirmation. So without getting into a lot of detail, because the other things I want to talk about, there are some charts here that are showing, what happened in each of these different forms of the heart rate variability. So all the graphs have the same consistency, where the baseline activities are blue, the meditation's magenta, and the yoga's yellow. And then you've got the before and after, before and after, before and after in each case. So you can see that after, in every case, there's a significant improvement in the high frequency of the heart rate variability. And you can see the same for the low frequencies. We can go back to these if anybody wants to look at them in more detail. And you can see the same for the very low frequencies with that highly significant increase after meditation. And when correlated with the psychological well-being scale, we get a pretty good relationship, like it's a pretty high correlation there, of the well-being with the very low frequency of the heart. So that was borne out, that there's actually a connection there between the physiological and the psychological aspects of well-being. So with those rating scales, the psychological well-being scale of RIF, all of the participants scored normally high on well-being. The PWB was highly correlated with the very low frequencies for people in their normal activities, and it was highly correlated with the after meditation condition, and negatively correlated with heart rate, which is very consistent as well, because the heart rate goes down when you're calmer. So with the beliefs about consciousness and reality scale, all of the participants scored high on transcendent views of reality. And I know some of you are aware of Ematz's work on this, but for those who are not, the people who are high on the transcendent scale tend to be non-materialist and have extraordinary experiences and beliefs, things that science can't explain, and there's a lot of inner growth, and they have their own religious beliefs. So that's all of the participants fell into that category. So with the reg, which is interesting, I haven't done the stats yet, and I realised that I could be here for the next year just teasing out the stats for this small group. And I want to develop a new method of analysing the reg traces, actually, and some of you might be able to help with ideas on that. But what I did notice in the process of running the field reg is that there were a lot of correlations going on with recognisable psychological states of people. So if everybody can see that clear enough, I'll run through what these represent. They're just some clear representative traces that we saw in different parts of the experiment when different dynamics were going on between the people. So this one on the top left is pretty much what I would call baseline hugging, where the participant was meditating, but I, as an experimenter, was also in a meditative space, and the reason I came to that was that I noticed if I was thinking something different or having some experience with an emotional tone, it would start to affect the reg. And so it was almost like I had to baseline myself to enable what was happening for the participant to be revealed. And just one interesting aspect of the methodology is that, having read Herb Mertz's book on his whole journey with the reg, and it sounds kind of funny to sit there talking to a machine, but I basically said, reg, just show me what's going on, and can you tune in to this participant? So it was almost like I set the intention that the reg was going to specifically focus on the participant, but also show me what was happening in the situation. So, and we have all this discussion about our intention basically governs what we see. And so in this case, it was actually useful for that to happen, because I did want the reg to focus on the participant, give me some indication about what was happening to me, and also be time locked, because I know that when we get into non-locality, time is out the window. And so this was a case where I actually wanted the reg to be showing what was happening in consciousness in real time between me and the participant. So this was like an early attempt to bring in the sciences of the subjective and include the experimenter in the experiment, so that it's not just an annoying effect, having an experimenter effect, but it's actually inbuilt into the experimental method. And I'm doing a lot of thinking about how we can, expand on that. So there's a bit of baselining going on between the participant and the experimenter. And if you have a look at the one to the right, it started off with this kind of pretty baselining look, and then there was a distraction where the person was meditating. Something happened. I think this was a case where a whole bunch of children came home from school together and very noisy and basically invaded the meditative space, and suddenly the reg took off. And just to be clear, when the participants meditate, the audio and video turned off. So there's no sensory connection whatever between me and what they're doing. And so I feel that that's important, because then we can say that if there's a disturbance at their end, it's not something coming through from where I am. And there was an interesting other thing starting to happen when I say that the regs seem to be showing things that correlate with known psychological states. In this one, the second one on the left here, the participant was becoming very concerned about their well-tory results, like it was showing stress and physiology was not in great shape. So they were becoming concerned, and the trace was going down and down and down until it was a z-value of minus 2.72, which is a very significant deviation from random. And contrary to that, the one to the right of that, when the participant was very excited about their well-tory results because they had great results, then the reg went way up and we had a significant Z of 2.18. So then in the bottom left, in this case, the participant, when the meditation session finished and we got to talk again, they were in a very steady state of meditation, but I, as a researcher, had a worrying thought that kept coming into my mind, and the reg was going down. And then another illustration of this was where I was having a discussion with the participant after the experiment had finished, and in the discussion they began to talk about something in their past which had been worrying and concerning for them, and they went into self-doubt, and the reg was going down, and I'm sure Herb's got a big smile on his face right now. and then we identified that and had a discussion about the fact that there was self-doubt in that person, and they immediately pulled themselves back away from dwelling on the past and the negative experience. And then we started to get into a discussion that became increasingly exciting, and the reg started to go up again. So I had this amazing feeling that we could start to use the reg, even in mainstream work with humans, to as a kind of monitor of the dynamic going on between an experimenter and a participant, because we can't take the experimenter out of anything that we do, even if we're materialists doing mainstream psychological experiments. So that was pretty inspiring. So just an overview of what occurred in the experiment. General increase in the heart rate variability measures, wide correlation with the psychological well-being, and that was consistent with what some other researchers have found. And in the field of heart rate variability and physical health, there's a strong sense that those are correlated with psychological well-being and that they're intimately related and mutually interactive, which is a no-brainer, because we'd expect to find that in a biological organism. And so that the significant increase in the VLF was consistent because like Schaffer and Ginsberg have related very low frequency waves to unhealthy physical states like dying from cardiac arrhythmias and inflammation, hormone imbalances, and so on. So you can see how the having an increased very low frequency as a result of meditation does bear out the fact that meditation has beneficial physiological effects, and we also found that that was a psychological effect too. But a paradox came in because the meditation condition in this experiment increased the low frequency waves, and other people have found that too, and there's been a bit of a puzzlement about that because the current belief is that the low frequency waves are a sign of stress coming through from the sympathetic nervous system. And yet meditation produces relaxation and well-being. So there was a dilemma, well, how can meditation produce well-being if it's actually producing an increase in a frequency in the heart that's supposed to be in accord with stress? And again, Schaffer and Ginsberg have postulated that slow respiration can raise the LF. And of course, when people are meditating, they're often breathing very slowly. And so another group were discussing that problem and saying that we need to critically assess, our traditional kind of attitudes about what HRV is doing in relation to physiology and other things like that, because meditation seems to be breaking the rules, so to speak. And another group was saying that HRV is a result of more complex sympathetic parasympathetic interactions that are not yet fully understood. So that's great in terms of talking about the physical. We've got a long way to go with looking at the relationship between those physiological and psychological and well-being aspects, but nobody's talking about how non-local correlates are going to fit into that picture. And of course, people like Dean Radin and so on are starting to use the reg and look at multimodality ways of, measuring what's happening. In conclusion, although it was a small sample size and short recordings, but it was surprising to get the high correlations that were there. Psychological well-being correlated with many heart rate variability measures. The biggest impact was on the very low frequency. The yoga that was done was not very dramatic, and talking to the participants and reflecting on it later, I feel that because it was a guided yoga, it's a recording online, so it went for 10 minutes and the participants would just hit the play button and then they would basically follow what the yoga teacher was asking them to do in terms of tuning into their body. That perhaps that's taking a person a bit more into their head because they're focusing on what a person's asking them to do, then they're thinking about the time, and so that might be reducing the kinds of benefits and the depth that the person is going to. And the reg provided interesting insights that I feel need a lot more work, and there's some great stuff I can think of that can be done with that. So basically this model of using the iPhone app for physiology, the online sessions, and running the reg worked well as a combination of tools. So I'd love to do more on this. And so in the future, I feel that what would be great is to actually embrace experimenter effects, like really bring them in, so that what I want to do is do all of the same tests on the experimenter as are done on the participant. So they will fill out all the psychological well-being scores. They will have anything that they observe going on would be noted down at the same time, and a note made on the reg about what was happening. Questionnaires like the relationship between the researcher and the participants. So in this case of this pilot study, all of the participants are known to me, and there's a friendly, trusting relationship among all of us. They've all attended scientific presentations I've done before, so they were already kind of on board with working with me in that way. And that may be why every condition that we ran, they experienced an increase in the beneficial heart rate variability parameters. So you definitely can't take the experimenter out of the experiment, but I'm saying let's put the experimenter way back into the experiment and have the experimenter be a participant, so that then when we're analysing our results later, we can actually do all the correlations between all the parameters measured from the participants and the experimenter and get much more insight about what's going on. What was interesting, when the reg was showing these big shifts as people's mood changed, what I want to do in the future as well is to tease out those differences. So it seemed to be that when you're looking at emotions, for example, excitement and nervous stimulation, which seemed to be running the reg in the positive direction, and concern and worry, which were running it in the negative direction. So we were getting this two directions according to the type of emotion. And a question is for Herb and Adam and other people like that is whether there may be an unconscious intention to have the reg go in a positive direction in association with certain emotions and a negative direction in association with others. Because if that was an unconscious intention, it almost looks as if that's showing up in this experiment. That the reg has a kind of a natural tuning to which direction it goes according to the tone of the emotion that a person's experiencing. And both of those, in terms of being emotions, in contrast with meditative stillness, which, I mean, I have hundreds of reg traces that are not just in the pilot study. And what it seems to be happening is that when the more still and meditative people are, the more baseline adherent that the reg is running. Where it's not even as random as if the field reg was just running and nothing else was going on. So it seems that the meditative stillness is almost like, in some way, cooperating with the universe's baseline homeostasis or whatever's happening. I don't believe in randomness. My feeling is that what the universe is doing is not random in the sense that we tend to think of, but that it's normal process. And when we go into emotions, we disturb that. And when we're meditative, we don't disturb that. So anyway, that's a hypothesis for the future. I'd like to bring in something like having a checklist with many words so that while I'm working and while the participant's doing something, they can just be quickly, or at the end of their session, they can just go through a checklist and check all the words that are relevant to them. So we have a quantitative way of looking at what they were experiencing. And also dropping down to 1 minute reg segments, because those 10-minute periods, an enormous amount of change was occurring in 10 minutes with what people were experiencing. So getting that down to very short automatic segments would be great. And then to do some tests on the reg tuning to people. So I was asking the reg to tune to a participant, and that seemed to happen. So the reg is kind of very obedient to what it was tuning to. And that would be great to do some experiments and have a look at what your intention is and how well the reg is actually tuning to that intended target. Also, I would like to do some other kind of analysis of the reg waveform, so that if you have a look at these, to do something almost like an area under curve for the total amount of deviation in one direction or the total amount of deviation of the entire session as a kind of simple direct visual, rather than running through the mathematics of z-scores and statistics, but have a kind of a quick measure of, oh yeah, there was almost like so many square centimeters of deviation compared to so many square centimeters of deviation. So there's a very direct visual sense of how much a condition produced deviation in the reg. I have no idea how to do it. I've looked at things like fast Fourier analysis and area under curve, and nobody could give me an idea how you would do it with a wiggly, squaggly trace like the reg random walk diagram. So any ideas for that would be very welcome. And in the future is also obviously a lot more replications and a lot more subjects. But if the PhD project goes ahead, I'll have access to a lot more equipment, do some really cool stuff with EEG and so on. So I'll leave it for there. I'll pop some references on the screen if anyone wants to check that out, and I'll leave it for there. So shall we open for questions?
Yeah, thank you, Diane. It's first of all, I think this is a very forward-thinking and really a really great study, integrating in so many different concepts related to physiology. And I love the way you integrate the experimenter effect in. I think it's a great approach, and I love the way you're thinking about these. When I'm watching the questions come in, I've done this a number of times for a number of days now. As the talk goes on, all of a sudden, for some of the more exciting talks, questions start coming up like crazy. So I know we're not going to get to all of them, but there's one of them that in particular I want to make sure we catch right now. and that is, I want to find it here. Can you walk through a session, like the meditation section? Exactly how did you run it, and what was the experimenter doing, and how was it all set up?
Okay, so pretty much I'm sitting at my desk in front of my computer like I am now. I've got a laptop next to me with the reg running in field reg mode. I've got Zoom open on the screen, and I've got a like a results sheet in front of me that I can write things into. So I record when the session begins, when the reg starts running, the time, the date. I've got a section where I can put comments about anything I notice that's going on. So, I was just thinking about a friend who died last week, and I have the time noted down. And so I can do a screenshot and record that on the reg, so I can say what corresponds to what. And obviously, I'm like a pilot here trying to run 10 things on a dashboard, so it can get quite intense and some things get missed, which is hence why I would like to have better check sheets. So that's going on. So then I connect with a participant on Zoom, and we've got audio and video on. And then I'll say to them, okay, I'll tell them when to go, and then start a baseline session. So go off and do something that you normally do. And they tell me what that's going to be. Like they might go do the laundry or go read a book or, chat with their kids or whatever it is they want to do. And they're home doing that. So they're completely in their normal paradigm. So they'll do that for 10 minutes and then come back to the screen and turn everything on. And then they'll do the Well Tory recording. So we sit there together. They've got that on their phone at their end. And so they do the physiological recording, and then they read out the results to me, and I write all the results into my check sheet. But also with the Well Tory, there's a facility where they can share, and it comes up on there's a desktop-based app on the internet. So you can log into your Well Tory account, and then you can access all the charts. So it's got all the data on there of every heart rate variability parameter over periods of time, and you can choose the daily, the monthly, the weekly, or the yearly chart. So you can get a lot of data off that, and then it's got all the readings of the measures. So that I would get them to then send that to me, so I would have the backup for that. So that's like a typical session. So with 10 minutes of what they do, I'm recording stuff here, the reg's recording stuff next to me, then they come back, they share what happened, we do the Well Tory reading. So for example, they do their normal activity, and then after we've done all of that sort of finishing checkup, then we would do a meditation session. So we would say, okay, go, and we turn off our screens and our sound, they go off and meditate, and at the end of the 10 minutes, I turn on mine again, and they sometimes I'd have to give them time because they'd run on a bit in their deep space. They'd come back to the screen, and then we'd do the Well Tory reading again. So that would be after. And I would be writing down what I noted on the reg in the meantime, and any questions that I wanted to ask the person about what happened for them. So that's the basics of a session. Is that enough? Does that cover it?
I think it was great. I think you gave enough details. I'm sure there are people who have more questions, but we'll have time for that later.
Yeah.
So, people are interested in what you actually were saying. What can you repeat what you were saying to the reg? It seemed like you were coaxing the reg. What were you saying?
That's fun. And I felt a bit like, oh, duh, I feel really stupid. I hope nobody's watching me right now. But because there's so much discussion, in this group and other groups about the impact of intention on what happens in an experiment, and not just with a reg, but with anything, like anything in life for that matter. And so I'm looking at the reg going, I don't know you very well, but I've read Herb Mertz's book, and so here we go. And so I said, well, what do I do with this? How do I, because it's field reg, right? I'm not sitting there pressing a button trying to make it go positive or negative. And I had no idea what I was going to be seeing. Complete naive, and that's great because I came in completely naive. So I went, okay, Reg, can you show me what's happening in the consciousness of my participant? Basically, just, can you do that for me, right? And then, but oh yeah, don't entirely leave me out, because I want to know if I'm having an impact. Oh, and yes, can you make it this time? Like, can you make it fit the time? because I don't want, remote precognitive viewing to come into the experiment. So basically asking the reg, focus on the participant, don't leave me out of it, and stick with current time. So that was the intention, and that was what I asked the reg to do. And as far as I could tell, that's what it did.
Well, whether what you did had an impact or not on the reg, what's really important, and what's really, I think, what you did that was really genius here, is you recorded all of your thoughts during the process, and you made note of it so we can see what type of, if there is an impact. There was a woman, Rhea White, who wrote a great deal about how experimenters should approach their experiments and record their own thoughts and expressions during the experiments. She did some excellent work, and I can see that you're actually implementing it and putting it into practice. Um, and I can see, yeah, here we are. Okay, yeah, I can see you're putting it into practice, and I'm happy to see that happening. There's so many good questions here, so let me get to another one. Um, does he? So you talked about the increase during the meditative state, that there was an increase in all the physiological parameters. And the question is, does this indicate an increase in energy consumption?
Um, Energy consumption. That's a really interesting question. We do have one participant here on the chat. He could possibly answer the question about whether he felt that energy was being drained by having the increase in all of these. But from my understanding of the literature, when your heart rate variability goes up and the power goes up, you're actually, it's like you're powering, but it's not in a way that drains energy. And I know for me, when I've been recording my own HRV for 2 years now, and when I'm really on a roll and I'm strong and I'm fit and I'm working all day, I don't need a lot of sleep, I've got loads of juice, my HRV's max. But if it's low, then I am actually running out of energy and I need a mid-morning nap. So it's as if having that increased power in the HRV actually gives you energy rather than takes away energy. So that's my personal experience of it, and it seems to be what's in the literature, although it's a fairly young field in that sense.
Uh, Interesting. And so, does this have anything to do with oxygen consumption? Could they be related?
They could be, because the heart rate goes down. So the heart rate going down indicates that you're not needing as much oxygen, so you're not needing to generate as much physical energy in your body to do what you're doing. So it's like you are more meditative when you have a high HRV. So the less oxygen consumption, lower heart rate, lower drain on the energy system. So I think that's all related. There could be some really great work done on that.
So I'm trying to read through some of these. Do you have any comments on the role threat bias might have?
Threat bias.
Yes, I'm reading the question here.
Threat bias.
If someone feels threatened during the process, would that play a role as well?
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, there were things that we observed. So, for example, somebody would be in the middle of their yoga or meditation session, and I'm watching the reg suddenly take a dive and going, something's happening for them and it's not meditative, right? So I would ask them afterwards, and then all this human stuff comes up, like I was worried about time because I'm trying to meditate, but I thought it had to be 10 minutes exactly. And so they were getting into that concern about time. Or, and one of the participants, totally gorgeous person who's very much wanting to help, and she was saying, I wanted to do this really well for you. I didn't want to disappoint you. I wanted to do this really well for you. So she was putting a kind of a burden on herself about performance. And then another person shared that they went into like the old hurts we all have with the education, where we're punished if we don't do well, or we're being tested all the time. And so just the fact of being tested, she'd start to go into this anxiety about being tested. But these were moments, and most of the participants, by their very nature, were able to recognize that, master it, get past it. And so in general, everybody got a beneficial effect of it. But I can imagine that in a more general population, that could be quite a significant thing, and it would be all over the shop based on people's experience. So that you could control for that. I'm sure you could work something out about that.
This was really fascinating, and I congratulate you on having such vision to do this and combine these different aspects. I really enjoyed your talk.